Pain bone deep. Pain the American named Robert curled up in a foul, stinking, muddy ditch at the foot of Qingyun Mountain. Sharp stones whipped through the air and slammed into his back. A grunt forced its way out of him. It had been 3 days since he fell into this place called Kanglan World. His blonde hair and blue eyes were treated here like the mark of a monster fit for execution. Villagers in rough hemp clothes crowded around with clubs in their hands. They shouted harsh syllables he could not understand. There was no pity in their eyes, only fear of the outsider and a fever to wipe him out. Wild dogs followed the smell of blood and closed in green eyes fixed on the calf of Robert, where the wound showed bone. Ropey saliva dripped onto his face. One dog opened its stinking mouth. It was about to tear out the throat of Robert. Then, a streak of blue sword light split the sky. Cold air swept down as the dog was cut in two. In an instant, Robert looked up in terror. A middle-aged man in a black Dao robe hovered on a flying sword. A faint spiritual glow curled around him. He was Sect Master Xianxia of the Qingyun sect. Xianxia landed and let his gaze pass over the strange color of the eyes of Robert. He showed no disgust after he probed the meridians of Robert. A greedy joy flashed deep in his eyes. He flicked his sleeve. A gentle force lifted but from the edge of shock. They turned into a streak of light and shot into the sky. When Robert woke, his life was not heaven. It was a different kind of hell. He was brought back to the Qingyun sect. His unusual appearance became a joke for the whole sect. In the dining hall, disciples laughed and talked freely. Robert held 2 long chopsticks in a clumsy grip. His fingers were stiff, like rusted machinery. No matter how hard he tried, the rice kept spilling across the table. Laughter burst out all around him. The insult white fur monkey was branded onto him. He could not speak their language. He was trapped behind a wall of culture. In this cultivation holy ground, he lived like an island. Every mocking stare hurt more than the stones from the village. Only his master Xianxia was different. Late at night, Xianxia pushed open the door to the room of Robert. He saw a disciple with a face streaked by tears. Robert was struggling to learn the language of this world. Xianxia offered him a pill that carried a clean, sweet scent. Robert swallowed it in startled gratitude. Warmth rose in his belly at once. It drove off the hunger and cold of the past days. Xianxia stroked the golden curls of Robert. With a kindly hand, he solemnly passed down a manual called Harvest Robart. He lied that it was an unmatched secret made for the special body of Robert. Robert dropped to his knees. He slammed his head down with the awkward etiquette he had just learned. His eyes were full of worship in his heart. He swore to repay with his life the master who pulled him out of the mud. He did not see the private delight hidden under those gentle eyes. The north wind carried snow grit that scraped his cheeks like blades. Robert lay flat on the ice cliff. In the extreme cold lands, frost had sealed his golden lashes. White, he had been waiting here for 3 days and 3 nights. He was here for the ice spirit herb growing on the sheer rock face. Ling Ah, the sect master's daughter, had mentioned wanting it as if it meant nothing for him. It was the only way to belong here. It was the only way to prove he was not useless. An ice-filled wolf burst from a snowdrift. In a flash, its claws tore the air with a rank animal wind. Robert was only at the Qi refining realm 3rd layer. He could not meet it head-on, but there was no fear in his eyes, only a stubborn fever that would not bend. He growled and drove the harvest robe art through his body. He ignored the agony of cracked ribs. He turned his back and took the blow like a shield. He used the impact to throw his iron sword forward. The blade punched straight into the wolf's eye. Hot beast blooded outward. It painted his pale face and soaked his bright blonde hair. He limped back to the Qingyun sect with 2 ribs broken. His body swayed with every step. He did not stop to bind his wounds. He clutched the clear, shining herb like it was a lifeline. He hobbled toward Ling Ah as she admired flowers in the garden. Inner disciples saw him drenched in blood and dressed in rags. They covered their noses and laughed. They whispered that the white fur monkey was acting crazy again. Robert forced his voice through a raw throat. His hands shook as he offered the blood-stained herb. His eyes begged for a single approving look. Ling wore fine silk and jeweled brocade. The stench of blood hit her and her brows drew tight with disgust. She did not reach for it. She stepped back as if he might stain the air around her. She wrapped her hand in a silk handkerchief. Only then did she pinch the herb between her fingers. She tossed it down to her snow mink like it was trash. She mocked him and said it reeked of barbarian blood. She said it was only fit for feeding beasts. The snow mink swallowed it in a few bites. Laughter rolled through the garden. Robert's smile froze. On his face, pain twisted through his chest. That had nothing to do with broken bone. But he forced himself to excuse her in his mind. He told himself she was testing his devotion. He told himself his bloody filth had offended her. A heavy presence fell over the garden. Sect Master Xianxia appeared. At the end of the corridor, his gaze swept over Robert's broken ribs. His eyes flicked to the snow mink that had eaten the herb. A cold shadow flashed deep within him. Then he wore the face of a strict and loving father. He scolded Ling Er for her cruelty. He turned and stared at Robert. In front of everyone, he announced a message that shocked the whole set. He said, Robert's sincerity deserved reward. He declared Ling Er would be given to Robert as his wife. He set the wedding for the 15th day of next month. Robert stared up at him in disbelief. He forgot the pain. Tearing through his body, tears spilled out as if heaven had finally answered him. He believed his suffering had ended and his blessing had arrived. He did not know what kind of truth waited behind it. Red silk rolled like waves through the main hall of the Qingyun sect. Hundreds of dragon phoenix candles, as thick as a child's arm, burned the night bright as day. Robert stood on the high platform in a heavy red wedding robe. His blonde hair was pinned up under a jade crown. His blue eyes reflected a hall full of guests, wearing fake smiles. He believed this was the moment when suffering finally turned into honor. The looks that once held contempt now seemed to bend into awe. He did not know that, in their eyes, he was only an exotic beast, dressed up for sacrifice. After several rounds of wine, senior disciple brother Wang Meng swayed over with a cup in his hand. Wang Meng stared at Robert with jealousy and cruelty boiling in his eyes. A vicious curve tugged at his mouth as he raised his voice to toast. He planned to drive inner power through the cup and shatter the organs of Robert. He wanted the white fur monkey to vomit blood and disgrace himself in front of everyone. Robert sensed nothing. He only thought old grudges were finally melting away. Gratitude surged up, and he lifted his cup with both hands to meet him. The instant the cups touched, Wang Meng showed a flash of a pharaoh green power poured from his palm like a hidden blade. At that same moment, the warm, quiet whirl inside Robert's dantian, named Harvest Robe Art, suddenly spun in reverse. It moved like a starving beast, guarding its meal. I teased the invading true chi and flung it back several times stronger. A sharp crack rang out. It was not the sound of a cup hitting the floor. It was porcelain exploding between their hands. Wang Meng froze, with his grin locked on his face. A heartbeat later, he screamed. Porcelain shards, wrapped in the rebounding force, slammed into his face like a storm. One jagged piece punched straight through his right eyeball. Blood and white pulp sprayed out. In a sudden burst, Wang Meng toppled backward and hit the ground hard. He clutched his face and rolled in agony. His howls tore straight through the wedding music. The entire banquet fell into dead silence. Everyone stared at the blonde young man who looked harmless a moment ago. Robert stood rigid with both hands smeared in blood. He did not understand what had happened. Sect Master Xuanji threw back his head and laughed loudly. He praised Robert as a genius seen once in 100 years. He declared that Robert would surely inherit the Qingyun sect and carry its great line forward. Robert's mind drowned in his master's wild laughter. He mistook this for respect earned by his own strength. He never noticed a greedy red light in Sect Master Xuanji's eyes. He never noticed the look of a man ready to harvest a ripe fruit. The wedding candles spit bright sparks. The red silk in the room glowed like a rolling sea of blood. Robert pushed open the carved wooden door. Wine heat rushed up and made his steps unsteady. He walked toward the slender figure sitting on the edge of the bed. His hands trembled with longing for a life as cultivation partners. His fingertips brushed the chill of silk. It felt like the only home he had left in this alien world. The red silk slipped down. What appeared was not a shy face. It was a pair of eyes cold as an ice vault. In a single flash, a flexible sword slid from Ling Er's sleeve. It sank into the right shoulder of Robert with a wet sound. It severed the tendons in his hand with perfect precision. The pain had not even reached his mind. The door was hit open by a violent force. Robert's throat rattled with broken sounds. Terror and disbelief flooded his blue eyes. He could not move even a finger. He could only watch as the so-called master reached into his robe. Sect Master Xuanji drew out a black bone knife. Xuanji spoke the truth in a flat, calm voice. The so-called harvest robe art meant exactly what the name implied. It was bitter needlework done year after year to make robes for someone else. Robert's unique foreign meridians were nothing but the best cultivation furnace. They were meant to nourish a living spirit root. Now the heat was finally enough. Now it was time to harvest. Ling Er stood to the side, without a flicker of warmth. She watched her father raise the bone knife. He slowly cut open the lower belly of the man she was to marry. Blood burst out at once. It soaked the already crimson wedding robe. It blended into the red carpet on the floor. It became impossible to tell celebration from cruelty. The bone knife went into flesh. Xuanji worked with practiced ease. As he peeled back the layers, it looked less like murder and more like a butcher dressing an animal. Robert stayed fully awake. He felt the cold edge move through his organs. His breathing turned into wet, choking gurgles. His blood would not stop pouring out. Ling Giar covered her mouth and nose with a brocade cloth in disgust. She treated Robert on the floor like a heap of rotten trash on this night. The wedding chamber became a slaughterhouse. Robert fell from the clouds. The gate of hell opened. Robert's body carved a broken arc through the air. He slammed into the mud and bones of the corpse chasm. Pain dragged him back to awareness for a blink. Then the stench drowned him. This was the darkest corner of the Qingyun sect. Here they dumped ruined medicine puppets and the wrong dead. Cold night rain mixed with corpse water poured into the huge wound in his belly. White maggots squirmed happily inside the torn flesh. His blonde hair had hardened into gray-black clumps. The human light in his blue eyes had gone out. Only a dead hollow remained to stay alive. Instinct crushed dignity. Robert lifted his shaking left hand. He tore a strip of black rotten meat from a nearby corpse. He shoved it into his mouth and chewed like a machine's sour rancid liquid slid down his throat. It made him want to retch it, also gave his foreign body just enough strength to keep breathing. He did not know how long those days lasted. One day, a servant disciple came to dump more bodies. He noticed a faint breath among the heap. He did not pity Robert. His eyes flashed with profit. To the Qingyun sect, anyone who could still breathe was useful fuel, especially a waste who had lost cultivation, yet still would not break. They looped a rope around Robert like he was a dead dog. They hauled him up out of the corpse chasm. They sent him straight to the back mountain. Nethermine poison miasma covered the place day and night. Mortals died the moment they touched it. Only cultivators could barely endure. Robert had no dantian. He was worse off than a mortal. The overseer Wang Mazi looked him over. Wang Mazi spit a thick wad of phlegm onto the ground. He wanted to test how much this waste could take. He ordered a bucket of slop dragged over. It had fermented for days. Moldy leaves floated on top of unknown filth. A dead rat tail bobbed in the muck. Eat it or die. Robert did not hesitate. He had forgotten what pride even was. He dropped to the mud like a beast. He buried his face in the bucket. He gulped until his stomach cramped. Wang Mazi threw back his head and laughed. Good, still alive. That means you can work. The whip cracked across Robert's back. Skin split open. Blood ran down into the mud. Robert did not make a sound. He only licked the scraps from the corner of his mouth. Then a boot slammed into his ribs. He was kicked into the nethermine tunnels. Eerie green poison fog drifted in the dark. From that moment on, he became the lowest ant in the underground night. On the deepest rock wall of the nethermine tunnels, sickly green corpse, phosphor water dripped without end. The air was thick with sulfur and the stink of rotting flesh. This place was forbidden to light. Even rats would not step into this dead ground. Only the occasional flicker of ghost fire lit the weathered white bones. In the absolute dark and silence, a faint skittering sound. It crawled under the skin like teeth grinding and blood being sucked by a devil. From the 9 nether depths, Robert curled in the corner of a narrow mine passage. By the weak phosphor glow he stared at a soft-bodied worm in his palm. Its body was clear, like glass barbs covered it from end to end. It was a spirit-devouring worm that made countless mine slaves tremble at the rumor of its name. One touch, and it would bore into the meridians. It would swallow spiritual ki until the host dried out. But now the vicious thing was greedy yet docile. It licked the dark red blood on the tip of Robert's finger, as if it were the sweetest nectar in the world. There was no fear in Robert's blue eyes, only dead cold silence. He used a fingernail to cut open a wound on his thigh that had long since festered and oozed. He endured the sharp pain without a change in his face. He pressed several rice grain-sized eggs into the rolled-back flesh. He pressed the adult worm in with them. Flesh squirmed. A twisted bond of symbiosis formed in silence. Heavy footsteps drew near with the snap of a whip cutting the air. The servant disciple overseer Wang Mazi stormed into this dead place, cursing non-stop. He looked at Robert sprawled on the ground like a dead dog. Brutal delight filled his eyes. He lifted a boot wrapped in thick iron. He stomped down on the face that was once handsome and now covered in scars. He ground it hard. Robert did not struggle. A low moan leaked from his throat. It sounded like begging. It only hid the feral flash that crossed his gaze as Wang Mazi bent down to grab his hair and keep beating him. Robert's left hand, smeared with mud and PS blood, brushed the overseer's ankle, as if by accident. The dirty blood on his fingertips, carrying worm eggs, seeped soundlessly into skin that had been scraped open by deep night. Came a shrill scream, ripped apart the quiet of the mine camp. Wang Mazi rolled on his bunk in agony. Under his skin, it was as if countless little snakes were thrashing and racing in less than the time it takes to drink half a cup of tea. His burly body shriveled before the eye. All his spiritual chi and essence blood were devoured clean. In the end, he became a stinking puddle of bloody water and a sheet of wrinkled human skin. Robert stood in the shadows and watched it all with a cold face. A tremor rose from the deepest part of him. It was not fear, it was the pleasure of holding life and death in his hands for the first time. He stepped over the filth on the ground. He searched through what Wang Mazi left behind. He finally felt out a cracked black token, hidden in a lining. It was contraband the overseer kept in secret. It was an array token long since abandoned, yet still able to open a blind spot in the sect guarding Grand Array. Robert clenched the token until his knuckles went white in the dark. His mouth slowly curled into a curve like an evil ghost. The main peak of the Qingyun sect blazed with lanterns and rolling red silk. It was a rehearsal for the celebration of sect master Xuanji as his secret art neared completion. Yet beneath that oil-boiling prosperity, the underground mine veins were dead silent. All the elite guards had been moved to the main peak to stand watch. Only a few outer disciples dozed at the mine entrance. That single lapse gave Robert a chance that might never come again. He moved through the abandoned tunnels like a ghost that had just crawled out of hell. His ruined body dragged through the twisted passages without a sound. In his hand, a black array token breathed cold through his palm. Wang Mazi had traded his life for this key to revenge. Robert did not try to flee the Qingyun mountain range. He knew his broken body would never cross the 1,000-mile wasteland. If he could not live, then he would drag them all into death with him. He found a sealed array nexus on the deepest level of the nether mine tunnels. It was the master vent left by the founding patriarch 100 years ago. It existed to draw out and discharge the toxic fire sha that pooled under the earth. A hard light flashed in Robert's eyes. His hands shook as he forced the cracked token into a warped slot in the stone dais. His fingertips split from the strain and blood seeped into the seams of rock. Gears scraped with a sound like grinding teeth. The sleeping array plate began to turn for the first time in a century. Robert did not shut it down. He smashed the spiritual circuit of the return valve. He sealed the outlet that once vented to the wilds. He forced the wind to reverse. Deep underground, the poison sha that had been compressed for 100 years began to move, guided by the array. It no longer poured into the wasteland. It slithered through the ventilation channels. Like a hidden viper, it gathered soundlessly into the earth veins beneath the main peak. Directly above lay the closed chamber, where Xuanji cultivated in seclusion. That point was also the array core, where the Qingyun sect spiritual qi was thickest. Robert had already measured the flow. When the full moon rose tomorrow night, the sect guarding Grand Array would run at full strength to drink in heaven and earth. At that moment, the dense poison sha would reach the heart of the main peak. It would mix into the rushing tide of spiritual qi. It would deliver the deadliest strike to the man who sat above everyone. When it was done, Robert collapsed. Beside the array nexus, he listened to distant flutes and drums drifting down from the main peak. Blue fire burned in his eyes with the madness of mutual ruin. This was a plan that left no heirs. He would watch this man-eating sect collapse from hell. The moon hung at mid-sky. Silver light spilled over the massive white jade altar on the main peak of the Qingyun sect. It cast a bleak, cold sheen. Two burly inner disciples dragged Robert by his ruined legs. They climbed the blood-stained stone steps, one slow step at a time. Robert kept his head lowered, golden hair tangled and wild covered his eyes. Those blue-green eyes were shot with blood, yet unnervingly clear. A muddy, rasping breath churned in his throat. He looked like he might die at any second. But the fingers hidden under his sleeve trembled in a way almost too small to see. He was feeling the faint vibration rising from deep inside the earth. It was something only he could sense. It was poison fire sha that had been stored underground for 100 years. It was slamming against the last layer of rock like a mad tide. It was waiting for the moment the dam finally broke. Sect Master Xuanji stood at the center of the altar, with his hands behind his back. Greed and frenzy flashed in his eyes, and would not be contained. In his mind, once the last drop of essence blood from this cultivation furnace was refined, his harvest robe art would break its shackle. He would step onto the nascent soul realm path. He looked down at Robert thrown at his feet, his lips curved into a smile that was merciful and cruel at the same time. He slowly raised his right hand. A ball of scarlet spiritual light gathered in his palm. He was ready to draw out the last spark of life from this foreign barbarian. Now Robert snapped his head up. On the face caked with filth and scars he showed a grin more vicious than an evil ghost. He forced out the last thread of strength in his body. He bit down hard and crushed the spirit stone shard hidden between his teeth. It carried the detonation array rune. A dull boom rolled up as if it came from the pit of hell. In the next breath, the entire main peak shook violently. The array nodes around the altar that had been built to gather spiritual chi overloaded. In an instant, what burst out was not pure spiritual chi. It was nether poison shot thick as ink. It reeked with a bloody stench that punched into the lungs. The two disciples escorting Robert took the first blast head on. They did not even have time to scream high pressure. Shame melted their protective aura. Their skin blistered, rotted, and turned black. In a blink they fell to the ground twitching and died. Disaster struck without warning. Xianxi's face changed sharply. He rushed to circulate his power to resist the filthy surge. The spiritual power that used to run smoothly inside him went wildly out of control and reversed in chaos. In that slice of confusion, Robert, who had been limp on the ground, moved like a lone wolf erupting from a corpse pile. He did not hesitate even for a breath. He rolled with a momentum toward the body of a dead disciple. His bony hand snatched up the tempered steel saber that had fallen to the stone. Blade light flashed once inside the choking dust, and smoke. Robert Dantian was shattered, and he could not use spiritual power. But the body that poison worms had tempered was no longer ordinary flesh. He became a gray shadow flying low along the ground. He used the moment when low-level disciples panicked and the poison fog blinded their eyes. His saber cut across the nearest throat with ruthless precision. Scalding blood sprayed onto his pale face. It painted the clear green blue of his eyes with a dead cold shine. He did not stop. Dragging one injured leg, he used the blast shockwave and the cover of the sky-filling poison fog. He lunged at the next target again. Tonight this sacred altar was destined to become a slaughter ground. A pale golden protective aura rose around Sect Master Xianxia. It sealed off the rolling gray-black nether poison sha that filled the sky. This sudden earth fire poison chi was fierce, but before a powerhouse about to step onto the nascent soul realm path, it was only drifting dust. Xianxia frowned slightly. He looked at Robert slaughtering through the smoke like a rabid dog. Impatience flashed in his eyes. He was about to raise a hand and crush Robert completely, but a scarlet figure flashed out. First it was Ling Er. She wore a bright red wedding robe today. In her hand, the frost-chill sword was colder than ice. Robert only saw a red blur. A drilling agony exploded in his knees and elbows. At the same time, the tendons in all four limbs were picked apart in an instant by precise sword chi. He slammed onto the cold white jade bricks of the altar. Inertia dragged him forward several meters. A shocking blood streak was carved across the stone behind him. Ling Er looked down at Robert convulsing in a pool of blood. Her gaze treated him like a filthy bug that did not know its place. She flicked the blood off her blade in disgust. Her voice was contempt to the bone. She said, "A worm like him still dared to dream of overturning the sky." She said the poison sha from the earth was strong, but it could not break her father's protective aura. She said his struggle was nothing but a clown show. Robert's limbs were ruined. His whole body went soft like mud. He could only writhe on the ground. Like a maggot, he knew poison chi could not kill Xianxia. But this burst and this explosion were never meant to be the killing blow. They were cover for what he truly prepared, using the force of being knocked away by Ling Er. His head stopped right beside the deepest array core of the spirit gathering array. On the altar, the groove there should have delivered pure spirit liquid. Now the array was overloaded and spinning madly. A terrifying suction formed like a devouring mouth. Robert twisted his head with effort. In his green-blue eyes there was no fear. There was only the madness of victory about to land. He faced the array core and coughed out a huge mouthful of heart blood he had stored inside himself. For a long time the blood was a strange purple-black. Countless tiny spirit-devouring worm eggs swarmed within it. They were mixed with the deadly toxic ore slag he swallowed in the depths of the nether mine tunnels in an instant. The terrible suction of the array swallowed it all. A sharp tremor rang out. The sound of the altar running turned suddenly shrill and piercing. Xuanji was at the critical moment of refining the spirit. His pores were wide open. He was greedily swallowing the energy the array delivered. He could not stop, even if he wanted to. The smug look on his face. In the pure golden flood of spiritual power, a black ink toxic blood reverse current suddenly surged. This force rode the amplification of the array. It tore through his protective aura. Without resistance, it drove straight into his dantian and qi. Xuanji's face swelled into a dark liver color in an instant. Then it turned a sick green. It was not an ordinary poison. It was a bone-clinging curse made to eat Cultivator's spiritual power. Terror lit his eyes as he realized his body was being corroded and dissolved by the toxic blood. The vast spiritual power that had been tame and obedient instantly broke loose. It surged backward and slammed through his meridians in violent conflict. A shriek of misery split the night sky. Xuanji features twisted out of place. The righteous face he once wore looked more vicious than an evil ghost. The auspicious spirit mist around the altar had turned into suffocating purple-black miasma. The night wind itself seemed to freeze under that evil crushing pressure. The air was thick with a nauseating bloody sweetness and a scorched stench. It felt as if the gates of hell had quietly opened on the summit of the Qingyun sect inside Xuanji. True qi ran wild, like a stampeded beast. The spirit-devouring worm eggs that had entered his dantian were greedily gnawing at his reason and his foundation. With poison tearing through his heart, his eyes turned blood red. The pure, calm pupils that once spoke of virtue held nothing now but raw animal hunger. The drained, raging spiritual power inside him formed a giant black hole. It screamed to be filled, no matter the cost. Even if the only choice was poison to fight. Poison Ling Ar stood nearby, still frozen by shock hearing her father roar. In torment, she moved by instinct to step forward and support him. She cried out, "Father!" That single cry became her death sentence. Xuanji dried claw, like hand shot out. It was lightning fast as it clamped around Ling Yar's long neck. There was no hesitation, there was no mercy. It was the madness of a dying beast, snatching a last straw to live. Ling Yar's protective aura was thin as a cicada wing before the desperate brute force of a nascent soul realm cultivat. Or it shattered in an instant. Her eyes went wide with terror. She stared at the face she knew and did not know. The mouth before her no longer carried gentle teaching. It was slick with hungry drool. A bone-grinding crack sounded. Her shriek ripped the sky open. Then, in the next breath, it collapsed into a desperate choking whimper. Xuanji opened his mouth like a blood-soaked maw. He bit into his beloved daughter's shoulder and neck artery. He drank like a madman. He sucked at the shared essence blood to suppress the poison inside him. The scarlet wedding robe was soaked through by an even brighter true blood. On this full moon night, the scene of father and daughter tearing each other apart was grotesque and unreal. Several zhang away, in the wreckage, Robert lay sprawled like a broken doll. Pain tore through his whole body, but those green-blue eyes were bright enough to frighten the soul. He made no sound at all. He only watched the collapse of all human decency in front of him. He watched the fiancée, who once stood above him and treated him like dust, now being ripped apart alive by the father she worshipped most. He watched the master, who once looked righteous and untouchable, now reduced to a monster that drank blood and chewed flesh. On Robert's face smeared with blood and filth, his mouth twitched slightly. It shaped a silent, cold sneer. Ling Er stopped struggling. Her once dazzling body withered before the eye. In the end, she became a dry skeleton. Xuanji tossed it into the dust like trash, but that blood of the same source did not suppress the spirit-devouring worm madness. It was like pouring oil onto fire. It burned away the last shred of Xuanji reason as the human-shaped beast turned to hunt the next living meal. The sky tore open with a scarlet blood seam. Wild laughter rolled like thunder. It shook the whole Qingyun mountain until the stones seemed to tremble. A blood-red saber light, 1,000 zhang long, carried endless killing. Intent, it chopped down toward the already wavering Qingyun Hall. Blood Saber Patriarch from a rival sect had sensed the sect guarding Grand Array was broken. He arrived. As expected, he came to wipe out the Qingyun sect. The roar of impact shattered the hearing of nearby disciples in an instant. The clash of two monsters unleashed a world-ending shockwave. In the blink of an eye, the towering summit was flattened. Robert did not care about the gods fighting overhead. He endured the tearing pain of his shattered dantian. He moved like a real crawling thing. He used a mind-slave memory of earth vein paths. He dragged his severed limbs toward a rock fissure behind the altar. It led to an underground dark river. It was a dead road. It was also the only way out. Boulders collapsed. Dust swallowed the sky as a sweep of bloodlight shaved off half the mountain and surged toward the altar. Robert, clenched his teeth until they nearly broke. He closed his eyes. He threw himself and rolled into the blackly cold underground abyss. Icy water swallowed him at once. It carried him toward an unknown faraway place above ground. The chain explosions triggered a reaction in the Xianxia, buried below the Qingyun sect that once stood unrivaled, became rubble under Xianxia, and bloodlight fire leaped into the sky whales. No one noticed the blonde barbarian was gone. No one cared any more than they would care about the life of an ant 3 months later in Blackstone City, on the edge of the mortal world. A cutting cold wind swept dead leaves across the noisy street crowds. They pointed at an imperial notice and argued in a buzzing knot. The notice announced the destruction of the Qingyun sect. It claimed the sect master suffered a cultivation deviation and died beneath the notice, a ragged beggar, curled in a wind-sheltered shadow. He had lost his left arm. His right foot was twisted into a warped shape. Golden hair hung filthy and knotted like dead grass in those green-blue eyes. The old foolish innocence was gone. Only a deep dead stillness remained. Robert used his remaining hand to pick up half a steamed bun. It was cold, hard, moldy, and packed with dirt. He tore into it with big bites. The chewing was almost silent under the street noise. Yet, it carried a brutal force that made the skin crawl. As he swallowed the rough food, he lifted his head. He stared at the notice, without blinking, in a world that had only ever shown him malice. He shaped a broken smile that was brighter than any lantern. His cultivation was gone. His body was ruined. His dignity was ground into mud. But he had beaten fate. He had survived. He was alive like a true beast, and he was ready to bite and tear a new path through this cruel cultivation world.